Hey guys, Elliot here from Prismata, and today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a different video. I'm going to be showcasing some opening strategy with Vivid Drone, specifically aimed at player 2 who has a lot of different choices in Vivid Drone openings and sometimes is faced with some very difficult challenges in playing Vivid Drone optimally. So I wanted to talk about that. I've got a little notepad file over on the side here, and I'm going to be taking some notes on these specific openings as we go through them. So if you ever need to refer to them, you can look over there. I'm also playing from player 2's perspective, so we'll just pretend my opponent is player 1. And don't worry about the other 2 units for now. We'll go into that a bit later. But anyways, some background information. So we do constant balance monitoring of all the different units in Prismata, and we try to look at all the stats to determine if maybe a unit's too strong or a unit favors one player over another. And Vivid Drone is actually, of all the units in Prismata, it's the unit that has the biggest, most one-sided balance. And I think player 1 wins something like 55% of the time when Vivid Drone is present. And that's as bad as it's ever been. I think the Windsor was like a 60% player 2 win rate when we had the worst version of it, but that got fixed. And Scorchilla was also about 58%, and that got fixed. So among the units that remain, Vivid Drone is the most one-sided unit in Prismata. And we've done a lot of analysis of Vivid Drone games and tried to identify the cause of this and whether or not it's something we need to rebalance or change. And it turns out that in most Vivid Drone sets, player 2 does have available to them a good opening that can compete with player 1's good Vivid Drone openings. The problem is that player 2 has way more options with Vivid Drone, and because there are all these different options, it's just very likely that player 2 plays the wrong opening with Vivid Drone. And something that we noticed is that the difference between player 1 and player 2's skill with Vivid Drone, it decreases as ratings go very high up into tier X. And if you look at, say, like 1900 plus games, we couldn't find statistically any difference between player 1 and player 2 with Vivid Drone. And so that illustrates to us that the problem is maybe just that players are making more mistakes as player 2 than they are as player 1. And you'll see why that's the case in a moment. But it's not necessarily that it's favoring one side so much as it facilitates play that's maybe easier for player 1 than player 2. So let's get into it. As player 1 with Vivid Drone, there's a pretty obvious opening that you play. Usually you play Drone, and I'm just going to skip player 2 turns for now. Then you go Drone, Engineer, and then on your third turn you get a Vivid Drone, and then you have 6 gold left over, which you can either use to get an Animus or Blast Forge or a Conduit. You can go Conduit Engineer if you want to really start pumping more drones. But essentially you have a relatively clean build to get out maybe 3 Vivid Drones and start getting whatever tech you need to facilitate the type of play. So I'm just going to note that down here. You open DD, then DDE, and I'm going to use the number 1 for Vivid Drone, since Vivid Drone is it has the build hotkey 1 on the left. So you're going to go 1, and then you go like Animus, Blast Forge, Conduit, or maybe Conduit Engineer. But that right there, that is the canonical player 1 Vivid Drone opening. Probably 90-95% of the time you play a Vivid Drone game, player 1 is going to do that. There's just not that many other options. I mean, there are some other things that you can do, especially if there's like a Doom Drone or a Wild Drone in the set, and there are minor variations on this theme, but this is generally what's going to happen. There is one other thing you can do, which is you can open Drone Engineer and then go Vivid Drone Conduit. And then on the third turn, I guess you get another Vivid, and then you have 5 in a green. So maybe if there's something like a kinetic driver or a fission turret, or maybe Isochronous, maybe not, but you can do this opening as player 1, and it's not necessarily awful, but you need to have some kind of very concrete plan for what direction you're going to take the game. Like maybe if there's Fission Turret and there's also Cluster Bolt, you could try and get an early Cluster Bolt off using the Engineers. I mean, there are definitely some situations where this is playable, but this is kind of a very niche opening that you're going to see in like 1% of games or less, probably. So let's focus on playing against the standard drone engineer, and then tech. So let's say you're player 2, and let's just ignore player 1 for now. How do you open as player 2 with Vivid Drone? Well, there's actually about 4 different ways that you could play just the first 2 turns. So we're going to go through all of them. The first way is you can go Drone Engineer with the idea of getting a third engineer so you can get up an early Vividrone. And then on the second turn, you get Vividrone, and then you have 6 less. So, you know, let's say you get an Animus. And so I'm going to write down these openings. So we'll call this opening number 1. And this is the Drone Engineer opening. So you're going to go Drone Engineer and then get a Vividrone. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to write down the other things that you buy other than drones, engineers, and Vividrones. I'm just going to write down a number for the amount of gold that you have unspent that you could spend on other things. So if you go back and check, we go Drone Engineer and then we have 2 in the bank. And then we go Vividrone and we have 6 in the bank. So I'm gonna use this kind of notation, just a number in the brackets to indicate the amount of unspent gold or gold that isn't spent on drones, engineers, and Vividrones. So what can you do with this 6 gold? Well, you can get an Animus. And this is typically what you would want to play in a Vividrone set where an early Animus is really strong. And I have the Electivore and Grimbotch, and we'll go through that in a moment. But this is option 1, and option 1 is generally for an early Animus. You can also get you can get an early Blast Forge as well, but there are other Blast Forge options that we will see with the other Vividrone openings. So that's number 1, where you go Drone Engineer. Opening number 2 is we're going to go Drone Engineer Engineer. And this is definitely a more econ-focused build, but it's not always the best econ-focused build. So here you would go Drone Vividrone. So let's just write this down. Drone Engineer Engineer with 0 in the bank, then Drone Vividrone with 1 in the bank. And if you want to keep going on econ, you can go, you know, Drone and then another Vividrone with 5 in the bank. So if you want to get a turn 3 Blast Forge, this is perfect with this 5. You can also get a turn 3 Conduit. Drone 1 again with 12. And of course, some of this 12 you could have spent on the previous turn. So for example, you could have spent the 5 on, say, a Blast Forge, and then on this turn you could get, I don't know, something like Militia or Steel Splitter or Synthesizer or some kind of Blast Forge type unit. And then this is where you get into a little bit of trouble with this build, because when you get to turn 5, you do not have enough drones in order to make another Vividrone. So if you want to continue growing your economy, you can get like 3 drones or 4 drones or 2 drones with the intention of making the 4th Vividrone on the next turn. And Vividrone is such a cost-effective economic unit that you often really want to buy all 4, because it's just it's such a huge savings in gold. But you know, you can't get the 4th one yet. You're gonna have to delay it by a turn. So let's say you just go 3 drones, because 3 drones is sort of equivalent to buying a drone and a Vivid. And I'm just gonna choose this particular continuation for comparison with one of the other opening lines we're gonna do. And you have 20 gold left over that you haven't spent. Of course, you probably spent it on something else by now in a real game. And let's just say you go Drone Vividrone one more time. This is definitely a big econ. You know, it's about 23 drones worth of stuff. Whoops, 33. But if you want to go for a big econ game and you want to get an early Blast Forge, then this is a very good line to follow. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and we'll do some comparisons in a bit. So what are the other Vividrone openings? Well, they all start with Drone. So I'm just gonna mark this as number 3. So you're gonna go Drone, and then the question is basically on turn 2, do you get 1 versus 2 engineers? So the 1 engineer variation I'm gonna call number 3. And basically, it's kind of a niche build. Like, you need to have something very specific to do on turn 3 if you want to play this. So it's Drone, Engineer, and then Vivid. And here you have 1 in the bank, here you have 2 in the bank, and here you have 9 left over. So, for example, if you want to go Blast Forge Conduit or you want to go double Conduit, then this works out. You can get the Vividrone, you can get up your tech, you know, and the question is mostly just like, what do you want to do? This could be a good option if, well, I don't know, maybe there's something like, you know, you want to get 2 kinetic drivers, or you want to get a Tantalum Ray, or going the other way, maybe you want to go Blast Forge Conduit and then get something like a Xeno Guardian. You know, there are definitely games where you want to play this opening, but because you don't really have the flexibility to get extra drones, you want to have something pretty specific to do when you do this build. There's another option, which is you can go Animus Engineer and try to get a slower red build that has, I guess, more drones, and you're going to get a bigger economy. So maybe Vivid drone and then a drone. The problem is you're left with 7 gold, and unless there's something like Immolite or Perforator to use up sort of 3 gold and a red, or maybe something like Nitrocide, then often you can't spend 7 gold and 2 red that efficiently. So it can work with Animus, but you want to be a little bit careful about what you're buying, and you might want to consider some of the other builds instead. Anyway, so that's number 3. The final option is you're going to open Drone, and then Drone, Engineer, and we're going to call that number 4. And of course, you have no money in the bank left after doing that opening. And so this is definitely for player 2, the sort of big econ Vivid drone build that you're often going to want to go for. And number 4 and number 2 are pretty similar. Number 2 cuts a drone on the first turn in order to get a Vivid drone on the second turn. And so you sort of buy 1 drone less and then buy 1 drone worth of income more on the second turn. So they're very comparable, but they're different in a couple of subtle ways that are pretty important. So here often you go drone, Vivid drone, and you have 4 remaining, which could be used for a conduit, and typically would be. And you notice here that we actually have 1 gold less than number 2. So you might think that build number 4 is actually just worse than build number 2 because you end up with 1 drone less. But there are a couple of differences. First of all, the Vivid drone supply is one difference. So in build 2, when you're in this situation, you would have already bought 2 Vivid drones by sort of the end of turn 3. And so you have 1 less Vivid drone remaining. And the other difference is because you have more drones left in your sort of regular drone pile, because you went drone on the first 2 turns, you can actually make more Vivid drones before you run out of drones. So if you just continue going drone, Vivid drone for a couple of turns, and I'm just going to continue annotating it. Go drone, Vivid drone, with 21 left in the bank. Well, you could see on this turn, turn 5, in build order 2, we would have had to go drone to keep up that sort of 3 drone per turn economic production. And we actually fall 1 gold behind. So here if we go drone Vivid, we have 34 left. And then we're out of Vivids. So if you compare these 2 builds in terms of how they end up at the end of turn 6, build order 4 actually pulls ahead by 1 gold. Okay, so it's just 1 gold better than build order 2 if you want to buy all 4 Vivid drones and you don't need that extra gold during these 2 middle turns. Okay, so this is sort of a very it's a very deep concept that you have to look at, right? So when is build order 2 better? Well, if you want to get a turn 3 Blast Forge, build order 2 is definitely better because you just can't get it with build order 4. You don't have 5 gold left over, you only have 4. So if you're going one of these big econ builds, you have to think, what structure do I want on turn 3? If I want Blast Forge, go with the drone, engineer. If you think you might want conduit, then go for the drone, engineer, and then get Vivid drone. All right, and it seems like a subtle distinction, but 1 gold difference does impact the game. It is going to affect your win rate. It's going to affect whether or not you have the strength to push a little bit harder against your opponent or whether or not you get held back. But anyways, so these are the 4 main Vivid drone openings, and they all have their different strengths and weaknesses. And as player 2, you should be thinking very early on, essentially on turn 1, about which of these different Vivid drone openings you want to go with. And you don't necessarily need to memorize them because you can kind of play them out in your head as you're playing the game. You can kind of go, okay, well, if I go drone engineer and then Vivid, I can spend 6. If I do this, I can spend that. And you can analyze it in game. You don't necessarily have to like have a Vivid drone cheat sheet with this sitting next to the game while you play. But it is important to remember that these considerations do matter. and that as player 2, it's so crucial to your win rate not to pick the wrong build. Like, if you want to go Blast Forge and you choose build 4, and on turn 3 you realize, oh crap, I can't get a Blast Forge. Like, that really sucks, and that's going to put you behind. And you have to be really cognizant of the fact that player 1 can go for this type of early Animus, and it's often a very convenient build for them to play. I was talking to a number of like top Prismata players and asked them, you know, they seem to agree that player 1 seemed a little bit favored in some Vivid sets, and I asked them, what is the most favored situation for player 1 in a Vivid set? And they told me, well, basically a Red Rush set, where you have something like Electivore or Grimbotch or both of them. And I said, okay, can we sit down and find a way for player 2 to deal with this and play well against it and reach sort of a balanced middle game? And we looked at it and we realized that these top players, they were actually just never playing build number 1 at all, even when there were strong red units in the set. They just discarded it as being too economically inefficient. And I'll show you why, but it turns out to actually work. So let's say player 1 opens Drone. As player 2, we're going to go Drone Engineer. DTE for player 1, and player 2, Vivid Drone Animus. Okay, and then the usual Vivid Animus from player 1. Now you get into a little bit of trouble here, because you have 10 gold, and, well, with 10 gold, you really want to get a Vivid Drone, but then you're left with 6 and you can't apply that red pressure. So you're left with the choice of either you go Vivid Drone and one of these attackers, let's say Grimbotch or Electivore. Let's go Grimbotch because we may want to spend the energy on something else. Well, if we can't afford a Vivid Drone, then Electivore is actually fine. But let's say you do something like this. The problem is this actually doesn't apply that much pressure. And player 1's in a very good position to go Vivid Electivore, right? Or Vivid Grimbotch, because they have exactly 12 income. So how do you overcome the fact that player 1 can spend 12 income so efficiently by going Vivid and then 2 attackers? And the answer is, well, you have to go back a turn. You actually have to skip a Vivid and just apply pressure. And we're not going to get Electivores because we are going to want to buy another Vivid. But let's say you just go double Grimbotch to try and apply as much pressure as possible. And then player 1, well, they have a couple of choices. They could try and get a Rhino in order to save one of their engineers against the Grimbotches that are going to be attacking. But then they're left in an awkward position where they can't get a Vivid Drone plus another red attacker. So they either have to get Vivid Drone and say 2 attackers and bite the bullet and lose 2 engineers, or they're going to have to say go Rhino, Grimbotch, and then just get a drone, and they're also going to have to skip a Vivid. So by applying this pressure and skipping a Vivid of your own, you could force player 1 into a situation where they either have to skip their own Vivid or they're going to have to pay a lot for that Vivid. And it may still be optimal for player 1 to do something like this, but it can hurt them in the long term. So let's maybe try Electivore Grimbotch. You can also just get Tarsiers. It's completely fine. And then we're going to attack. And now we're in this position where we have 12. And you can go Vivid. There are so many continuations, and honestly, we played this out a number of times. But in many of the continuations, player 2 ends up ahead, and we couldn't find a solid player 1 counter that really dealt with this effectively, because now you're facing 4 damage. It's pretty brutal. You know, you can just spam a lot of Rhinos to try and defend, but it's not necessarily true that you have the upper hand. Player 2 is sort of half a turn ahead in terms of dealing out the pain. And you can play this out, but you know, it's definitely tricky. I think I left a drone back needlessly. And essentially the game goes on. You can try and get up a Blast Forge as both players in these situations. You know, you can also hold back Grimbotches for defense, especially if 2 of them are going to die next turn. There's a lot of different ways to play it out. But in any case, it turns out that player 2 can fight back pretty hard and can often pressure player 1 and achieve a win in these types of situations just by going for this specific early build order where you get an early Animus and then just pressure the opponent. And it actually sometimes is optimal for player 1 to not go Animus first, because if you go Drone Engineer, player 1 does this, and you get the Animus up first, We actually played a number of games where player 1 went Blast Forge here just so that they could wall against the early onslaught, say double Grimbosh or whatever, and try and get into a more comfortable middle game type of position. Maybe just Tarsiers, I'm not sure. There are a lot of different permutations of this. And this type of play actually is more player 1 favoring, but of course player 2 probably shouldn't rush out a double Grimbotch when player 1's just able to put up a wall. But in any case, the number of variations quickly spirals so far out of control that it's, you can't really solve it for either side. But in our playouts, like I played a number of games with this exact set against top players as player 2. And I have a winning record with player 2, and it's not a 100% record. There's definitely ways for player 1 to fight back, but it does lead to an interesting and dynamic middle game where there's lots of different options, lots of possible tech switches. Like here, as player 2, you can try to get up a Blast Forge, and it actually works out quite nicely, even to just waste a red for a turn in order to get up that Blast Forge so that you yourself can wall. I'm not sure if Tarsier is the best. Electrovores might be better and faster, but in any case, it's sort of an endless barrage of different options available for both players, and you reach a balanced game where there's lots of available solutions. And of course, if there are other units, if there are green units, if there's double blue units or triple red units, those could definitely come into play too. So anyways, I think in every single Vividrone set that somebody sent us that said, we felt that this was player 1 favoring or something like that, we mostly just found that player 2 needs to play the right opening. And if they do play the right opening, then the game gets a bit more balanced. So I think if you're struggling as player 2 with Vividrone, you probably want to practice playing specific Vividrone sets and trying to decide which of the 4 openings gives you the best chance. Because trying out different openings as player 2 in the same set is kind of the only way to really gain knowledge or experience. And often, if you're just laddering, you never really end up doing that. You maybe play one of the openings, but you never get to find out what would have happened had you played a different opening. And that's something that you can do in practice games, or you can do an analysis, and that will give you the type of judgment that will enable you to make better opening decisions as player 2 in Vividrones. So I guess that's kind of my conclusion, is we're not going to be changing Vividrone for now. We know that statistically player 1 sees an advantage, but we believe that this advantage is mostly due to humans playing suboptimally as player 2 rather than the unit being inherently player 1 favoring. So with that in mind, we always want to leave a lot of things in Prismata for you to learn and discover and ways for you to improve. So take a look at player 2 Vividrone openings, try them out in your games, see if you could score a little bit better. Talk to top players and ask them what they would do as player 2 in Vividrone sets. There's a lot of ways to improve your play, and I hope to see you guys on the ladder. Until next time.